Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this Tech Talk. We're quite excited to be doing this because it's a new compliance regulation, the CCPA, and we're really quite excited to get a conversation started about this regulation and what it means for IT administrators dealing with California consumers. Right. So my name is Siddharth Sharat Kumar, and I'm going to be one of the hosts for this Tech Talk. And I work as a product specialist for Manage Engine SIM Solution Log 360. I also have with me today Vivin Satyan, who is one of our senior technical evangelists. And the two of us are going to get a basic conversation going about the CCPA and sort of talk about what this means for an IT administrator, right? So we'll look at some of the regulation itself, and what it means, and what rights it grants to the consumers and things like that. And also look at, as an IT team, what are the kinds of things you need to do to ensure the security of personal data, right? That is the data of consumers.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Sid. Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon or a very good morning. My name is Vivin Satyan, and I work as a senior technical evangelist. So I talk about the Active Directory solutions and the other cloud offerings that we have in Manage Engine. First things first, thank you very much for joining. And if you could just spend the next few seconds in letting us know whether everything is right with the audio and video, we'll be all set to jump right into the session. So if you could quickly make use of the chat window on your screen and then let us know that everything is fine. A yes would do. So if we get a couple of yeses, we'll start right away. So I think we'll wait for a few seconds.
Yep, I can see a few people. All good.
All right, awesome. Yes, good. Thank you, Muthu. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you very much. So we'll start right away. So yes, Sid, what is the agenda for today's session?
Right. So today we're going to be looking at the basics of the CCPA. I think today we can see a pretty good response with the registration. So when we first decided to host this Tech Talk, I was just a little
skeptical, to be
apprehensive in terms of the response we received. Yeah. But I think it's been quite well received. We had a lot of registrations and a lot of people tuning in today for this Tech Talk. And we're going to start right with the basics in terms of what is the CCPA, who must comply, because that's very important. Do you fall under the scope? Do you have to comply with this regulation? We look at what are the rights the CCPA grants to consumers. Right, so these are all things that, as a business, as an IT team, you have to ensure that your customers, they have these rights and these are taken care of. Right. So this is going to be the first part of the Tech Talk, and in the second part, we look at how do we get started with building a simple program for data security and compliance.
So basically this means we are going to give away action items and not just talk about product features. So we'll be giving away action items.
Absolutely. That's the point of this Tech Talk, right? So this is not going to be a solutions pitch or anything of that kind, but rather with regards to the CCPA, what are the kinds of technologies, what are the kinds of processes and best practices that an IT team needs to implement to ensure security.
Awesome.
Right. And I think because we've worked at Manage Engine, we've worked with various compliance regulations over these years. And most recently, it was the GDPR a couple of years ago. And we were looking at how some of our solutions and some of these technologies fit into the broader picture of the compliance regulation. Right. And because this is a relatively new one, and I mentioned the GDPR because a lot of people are calling the CCPA a sort of a mini GDPR, if you will, right? So the reason we're talking about this and engaging in this conversation is because this is as much a learning experience for us as a vendor, as much as it is going to be for you as an IT team.
All right.
Right? So please engage with us on the live chat. We will dedicate a few 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the Tech Talk, which itself will be for about 40 minutes. At the end, we'll keep 10 minutes so that we can engage with you on the live chat, understand what are your concerns, what you think about the regulation and what it means to your organization, because these inputs also help us, right, in providing the right kind of solutions.
All right, so it's going to be a mutually beneficial learning experience.
Definitely.
All right.
And I also have to state for the record that this is not by any means a legal consultation that we're giving. Obviously, we are vendors who are interested in the domains of IT security and data security. So whatever we are giving and the discussions that we are having today is more from the vendor's perspective rather than legal advice that you can, it's not going to be something that is legally permissible.
Okay, that's a disclaimer.
Right,
okay,
yeah.
That's a good point. Okay.
Okay, so let's get started, Vivin. So tell us, what is the CCPA?
Okay, CCPA. Let me start off with the formal abbreviation. So if I could call that California Consumer Privacy Act. Okay. Now, the objective is something similar to, as you pointed out, it's something similar to that of GDPR, which is like, if I'm a consumer and if I'd like to know if my information is being misused, or if my information is being at least, or in the sense used even after I quit the organization, or let's say in some form or the other, I gain some sort of control over my information as a consumer.
Right.
And what that means for businesses is businesses are now accountable for protecting my personal information. And anytime that I need to know whether my information is being used in some form or the other, I now have the right to ask the organization about that. And the organization is now liable to give me a report of some sort saying that, hey, your information is not being misused. We have protected X, Y, and Z of that. So that's basically the whole idea of GDPR, securing PII, personally identifiable information, and that the ball gets rolling on the 1st of Jan 2020. So that's when we get started officially with the GDPR. Now, as we said,
the CCPA.
Oh, sorry,
right.
The CCPA. I mean, blame it on GDPR in the last 2 years of it. Okay. Now, the reason why I wanted to start off with the definition of CCPA is every regulation has its own definition, and they say that the devil is in the details. So let me quickly give you the actual definition, the official definition by the CCPA board on what the regulation is and on what personal information is. Now, I'm just going to read out so that I quote unquote what was mentioned in the doc. It says, information that identifies, relates to, describes, is capable of being associated with, or could reasonably be linked directly or indirectly with a particular consumer or household, unquote. Okay, so this is what is personal information according to CCPA. Now, what are the identifiers? Identifiers is something that you can start working on. So for instance, you have the very common identifier across the US, SSN, Social Security Number, for any individual, like the ones that we have in India. We have Aadhaar. So we have in the US Social Security Number, and then you have your driver's license number, your passport number. And now that we are also talking about not just consumers, but also households, we'll also have to talk about the commercial information, such as records of personal property, the services purchased, or any sort of commercial transaction that happens that can, or in some way or the other, ties back to personal information, should also be brought into consideration. That's what basically CCPA tells. So to summarize, what is personal information and what are the parameters that personal information holds? I mean, you've seen a couple of examples here, and
this is the part where in the quotes it says reasonably be linked directly. Some of these identifiers are obviously things that you can directly link to an individual. So you have things like a name or a social security number or a passport number, which is a unique identifier,
and that directly links that person.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is not it, right? Because we have a lot more things in the CCPA that still fall under the scope of the CCPA, but you could count them as maybe indirect.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's not it. So that's not just personal information. So the one that we saw on the previous slide was just one half of the story. So you have a lot more. According to CCPA, biometric information, internet activity information, cookies, right? Audio, visual, AV information, or
Things from the things like your surveillance, and that thing comes under this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's say I have this surveillance footage in my organization, and I have terabytes of data that has user information in some form or the other. That also comes under the personal information clause of CCPA. So this is the scope. This is just to define the scope of CCPA. What are the areas that an organization has to focus on, and how are we going to secure PIIs of various kind that is present all across the organization in the forms of, let's say, files and folders, in the form of entries in your databases, in the form of, let's say, components in your cloud storage and all that. So how do we first discover all of them, and how do we secure all of them? So two goals, discovering and securing is the whole idea.
So this is the first thing that we wanted to understand, right? We wanted to know what we are dealing with when we say personal information. And it's really a lot of different things. So it's the scope of what comes under personal information is pretty large. So as an organization, you want to ensure that you are looking at all of these things. And now you need to think of what rights do consumers have.
Very important.
Because this is the first part. We've seen what is considered personal information to consumers. Now, what rights do consumers have over all of these personal information?
So we're going to have a look at it from two perspectives, from a consumer's perspective first, and then from a business's perspective.
Absolutely.
And we're going to tie it down to how can IT administrators, or whom I call the firefighters of the organization, do their best, or what tools do they use, or what methodologies do they use in order to secure all that information.
Exactly.
All right.
So we're going to get started with the rights. From the consumer's point of view, these are the things that consumers now are empowered with thanks to the CCPA. Right. So I think in a sense, the consumer is king is something that is very true when we're thinking of the CCPA, because consumers, when they have given the data, their personal information to a business, they have these rights. The first is the right to access or the right to know, which means that consumers have the right to ask an organization as to what data of theirs has been collected and for what it is being used for.
This not necessarily means at the time of exit, even when I'm
at any time. In fact, the CCPA says that 2 times a year, they can do this free of charge. So they can just raise a request. One of your consumers can come up to you and say, I need to know what all data of mine are you currently using in your organization.
In one sense, I feel happy that the limit is set to 2. Imagine that the limit is set to 20. Then I can only wish the administrators the best of luck, because they would only have time for that. All right.
But again, a big organization might have, you're talking about, thousands of consumers. So it's not, it could be many people doing just 1 or 2 requests, right, over the course of the year. So it can get pretty
out
big,
of place.
right? And the second right, the right to be informed. This is the part where even before collecting the data, the consumer has the right to be informed as to why the organization is collecting their data and what they plan to do with it. Right? So this is where some of these ideas like privacy notices and things like that come into the picture, right? When a consumer maybe fills up a form on a website, he needs to know prior to giving that data. This is sort of like the data consent. He needs to know what he's getting into.
Okay.
Right? The third thing is the right to opt out.
Okay, I have a question here.
Right.
The right to opt out, does that mean now for moving forward, if I do business in the California state, so should I have a web page, or if I have a web page, that web page should have an option that says, I would like to opt out of... Absolutely.
And in fact, the talk amongst a lot of the experts is that this has to be explicit in terms of if you as a consumer go to a business's website, there has to be a clear section that says right to opt out.
All right.
Right? That says opt out basically. So this is to say that the organization cannot sell your personal data to any third party, because a lot of organizations are involved in the business of sharing consumer details.
Yeah, I'm not picking names, but we have seen some really not so good cases in the recent past.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So this gives you as a consumer have the ability to tell the business that, hey, you know what? I don't want to be part of any of your data sale or data exchange programs. Any data that I give you has to be just for you and not for sale.
Okay.
Which also brings me to the fourth point, which is right to delete. The consumer can also say, you know what, it's not just I don't want you to share my data with a third party, but I no longer want to be associated with your organization. And they call this also the right to be forgotten, which is to say that it's as if I never in the first place gave my data to you. I need a clean wipe of any data that you have, that you've collected of mine since forever.
Okay.
Right? So these are the four rights. So it's important to understand that while a lot of it seems similar, they're each distinct rights that you're giving to the consumer. The right to access specifically means knowing what data has been collected. The right to be informed means prior to giving the data, the organization has to tell the consumer for what all data they're collecting and for what it's going to be used.
Does this apply at the time of breaches too? For instance, if the organization that I work for is breached, and now do I have the second right, which is right to be informed? The organization should let me know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. This is rather the organization that you've, as a consumer, you've given the data to. You have the right to be informed, which I'm going to get to in the information security.
Okay.
Right. So you have right to access, right to be informed. You have right to opt out, which is to say that you don't want to be part of any of these data sale or data sharing programs. And you have the right to delete or the right to be forgotten, where you tell the organization that your records need to be deleted from all of their storage.
Okay.
Right. And that brings me to the question that you asked, the right to information security. So this means that if once you've given your data to as a consumer, you've given your data to an organization, if that organization experiences an exposure of that data, you have the right the organization is obligated to tell you that this has happened, and you have the right to request more information about what has happened. And if the organization is found to be negligent, you can sue them as a consumer.
All right.
Right. So this is the part also where the IT administrators and the IT teams get involved, right? Because it's the responsibility of the IT team of an organization to enforce these information security principles, right? Of course, an IT team would have to work with other parts of the business, but I think the function of information security falls under the scope of the IT team directly.
There's a reason why we IT people are called firefighters.
Absolutely.
And the last part seems quite interesting. Yeah.
Right. Non-discrimination. That means that any consumer who decides to exercise these rights cannot be discriminated against. So as a business, you can't say, oh, this consumer had exercised the right to opt out or the right to delete. You can't treat him any different from any of your other consumers. Okay. Right? So all of these rights are things that are fundamental to a consumer, and this does not depend on the service that they receive from the business. So you can't, for example, make their sites load slower.
Okay.
You can't, for example, compromise on the quality of the product or service that you give just because the consumer says that they don't want to be part of your data sharing program.
No retaliation.
Right. These are fundamental rights.
Let's talk about the money part here.
Right. So this brings me to the penalties and fines. Right. So all of these rights that we looked at in the previous slide have to be enforced, and failure to do so can result in penalties and fines. Now, I will say that there isn't any a fixed way of enforcing these fines at this point in time, because it is still a regulation that is in the works. There are still tweaks being made, amendments being made. So we're still not sure on what the final implementation of the penalties and fines will be. But I will say that by the looks of it, they are looking at big, hefty fines for things like data breaches, right? So according to the text in its current form, they say that the fines could be anywhere between $100 to $750 per consumer per incident.
Okay.
So if you're talking about a kind of data breach in an organization with maybe 1,000 or 10,000 records exposed, you can do the math and see
number
that
of employees into
consumers into consumers
up to $750 depending on the level of the breach or
and the level of negligence as well matters, right? So it's if the organization didn't have the appropriate measures in place and was found to be negligent or just took the consumer's data for granted, the fine can be as high as $750. And say you have about 20,000 consumers, you're talking about, if my math is right, you're looking at fee of around $15 million in fine.
All right, right. I have a doubt. So when it says fine up to $750 per consumer, so if I'm an let's say a good administrator and I take care of my users' information, I give it utmost care, and I have done steps 1, 2, and 3 to prevent it, and I have a process in place to secure data, but it's still I'm breached. So does that mean I fall in the lower end of the bucket when it comes to fines? Let's say $100 per customer or $150. So if I have no things in place, no process in place to safeguard data, then I reach the top bucket. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. In fact, if you have a very clear data security program in place and you're able to show the relevant details to the consumers as well as the auditors, you may not even be fined. And we've seen this happen with some of these other regulations. It's not that every breached company gets fined. A breached company that did not have the appropriate measures in place.
It's basically the negligence that gets fined. Okay.
Exactly. So we're still waiting to see, how exactly the CCPA will be enforced and how exactly some of these penalties and fines will be imposed. But I think just like any other regulation, you're going to be penalized if you're negligent.
All right. Now that takes me to, now that we've talked about money, I see some not so happy faces. So if you're wondering, hey, does CCPA apply to my organization? I have answer for you in this slide, right? Now, according to CCPA, the definition goes like this: any for-profit organization that does business in California and satisfies any of the following 3 criteria. That's what differentiates whether you fall under CCPA or whether you don't fall under CCPA. These 3 are the parameters by which you can evaluate yourself and get the answer for whether you fall in the bucket or not. Number 1, if the annual revenue of your organization is greater than or equal to $25 million US, that means you are under the umbrella of CCPA. However, there are exceptions. I'll talk about the exceptions in a short while. Now, if you buy, sell personal information of more than 50,000 or more consumers, let's say you are a SaaS company and then you have 2,000 employees, right? But you process information about, let's say, thousands of users, let's say 60,000 users, 70,000 users for the application that you handle, then you fall under the umbrella of CCPA. Now, the third parameter by which you can evaluate yourself is if at least 50% of the annual revenue of your organization is from selling California consumers' personal information, then of course, the third I believe is the most important of all, because this directly points at the consumer information, right? So if you sell consumer information or personal information of your consumers, then yes, you fall under the umbrella of CCPA. We have 3 exceptions here. Number 1, if you're already under HIPAA, I'm saying when I say you're under HIPAA, your entire business, if it's under HIPAA's compliance, then you are exempt from CCPA because you're already doing the heavy lifting there. Now that applies to GLBA and also DPPA as well. So when you have these three compliance in place already, then you are exempt from CCPA. The reason being, you're already doing the heavy lifting. But your entire organization or the data that you hold should fall under the regulation of HIPAA. So let's say a main office has two branches, one focusing on healthcare data and the other one focusing on some retail business. So it doesn't mean the organization as such is exempt from CCPA. The retail part of the same organization will still be under CCPA's radar, right? So that's the distinction between.
And I think that's an important distinction because it's important to understand what the data that you have and which compliance scope does it fall under.
All right.
Right. So and also the point that you make about the personal information of over 50,000 or more consumers and SaaS companies. I think today when we have attendees from California, chances are a lot of them are coming from some of these SaaS companies. So I think this is probably, given that it's California, given the kind of companies.
Are you referring to the Silicon Valley by any chance?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay. Now
we have a quick summary of what Vivin just said, in terms of helping you identify if you fall under the scope of the CCPA. So this flow diagram quickly tells you, just answer these questions. Do you do business in California? If no, it does not apply. If yes, are you a for-profit? If no, it does not apply. If yes, and if you satisfy one of these three criteria that Vivin mentioned the previous,
then we wish them the best of luck.
Right, so it does apply.
Okay.
Right, so it's important to make this distinction and understand immediately is CCPA something that, at least as of today, it could change. Perhaps maybe your company grows in the future, but it's important to make this distinction that come January 1st, 2020, is the CCPA something that is going to concern your organization.
All right.
Which brings me to the second part of this tech talk, where we're going to look at how do we now implement a strategy for data security in our organization.
So you mean to say, no matter what regulation, whether it be in the past or in the present or in the future, that pops up, something related to PII, this is a process that organizations can use to secure data.
This slide is compliance agnostic, right? So this is the general way that you would go about approaching any sort of data protection standard.
Okay.
And we've seen some of our own at events talking about the GDPR. This is the kind of flow that we're looking at for an IT team.
All right.
Right. So the first step, and try to tie this back to what we've discussed already. The first step is to discover the data that you have in your network, right? So you need to know what kind of personal data you deal with and where in your network is it stored, right? So we'll come to the technologies that we are going to use to achieve this, but essentially what you're looking at is being able to scan the entire systems of storage that you have and identify what kind of data is stored in it. Right? And you want to be able to isolate the data to the extent possible so that it's easier to apply certain security policies on that.
Yeah.
Right? Which brings me to the policy check. You need to check if there are any violations. So maybe you're not allowed to store a certain kind of data, or maybe if you store that data, you need to apply certain extra security measures. So you need to check, once you discover the data that you have, you need to check based on certain policies that we'll talk about in the next slide, if there are any violations. And the third aspect is to define the access controls, right? So who has access to the personal data that you've collected? And you need to check the privileges by running reports.
And adding one point to this is, when you talk about access control, it's also about managing who has access to information. It's
Absolutely.
not just checking, but also managing, right?
Absolutely. So it's administering your in terms of your identities and managing those accesses, as well as then reporting on them to validate them and make sure only the right people, the authorized people, have access to personal data.
So this is an iterative process. So it's not like you scan it for, let's say, once in every 15 days and then you're done. No.
Oh, certainly not. This is iterative. So you keep doing the data discovery, the policy check, and the access controls, and finally you also implement a real-time audit of the various activities happening on the data. Right. So at the data level, you're going and checking who is accessing things, who's modifying things, and you're trying to ensure that you have this trail of events that tells you who has made these accesses to personal data.
All right. So now that we've talked about a process comes into reality, or a process comes into action only when we have action items. So I believe we have 5 key technologies for securing data of your consumers or of your employees, right? So the first technology that I would like to start with, as you mentioned in the process, it's data discovery, right? So we'll be talking about data discovery and access control, which includes checking and managing. And then we'll touch upon a bit of change auditing, and nothing beats FIM when it comes to securing data, because FIM is an integral part wherever you talk about data security. Forget about regulations, forget about GDPR or CCPA or whatever it is. When it comes to securing data, nothing beats FIM. And to integrate everything into one single solution and being able to see or marking down anomalies is only possible when we have a solution, something like SIM, right? So my effort in the next few minutes or in the next few slides is just going to be about how does Manage Engine help you to secure data. That's as simple as that. So let's get started with the first technology here, which is data discovery and storage analysis. Now, I don't have any stats with me, but I assume that, okay? I assume that at least 30% of user information is stored in your files and folders, right? I mean, I've seen certain organizations that even store passwords in files. So yeah. So storing user information in files, I think it happens. Now, with that said, how do you actually discover data, discover PII, again, personally identifiable information that's amongst your loads of information that you have in your infrastructure, and how does Manage Engine come into play? Now, I'm not saying that you should use a tool from Manage Engine to discover data. Now, if you're already using a tool from a different vendor, that's fine. All I'm saying is please ensure that you follow this process so that you get to know where exactly is PII, and is it being used or is it being abused, right? Let's get started here. So now if you take a closer look at the tool that we have here, now this basically does 2 things as mentioned in the deck. One is data discovery, so it helps you discover data. Now, one thing that I'd like to talk about when you say about discovering data is it's not just a general discovery. You'll have to have some sort of rule in place. You remember the PII that we talked about, for example, your social security number and let's say your credit card number. Every credit card number has a certain pattern. I'm not saying every PII has a pattern, but there are PIIs that have a similar, that have a specific pattern. For example, your social security number, your driver's license number, your let's say you have a unique identification, even that has a common pattern. So what I would suggest is when you are performing data discovery, it's very important that you add the pattern, or that you add the regular expression, talking in technical terms, of that regulation here. Let me quickly show you what I'm referring to. So if you quickly log into the tool,
and we're also talking about not just defining our own rules, but also having certain pre-built rules for a lot of the common types of PII that are out there.
Absolutely, it's not just out of the box, because it's no one size fits all. we are talking about data about users and who knows what. So every organization might have a different format. So you will have to have out of the box patterns, but you also have to have the ability to create your own patterns, right, and then scan your files and folders. So now I'm just going to give you some predefined rules that we have. So let me go to the rules here, and the rules that we have is, of course, you can see some predefined rules here. And now that we're talking about the US, let's do SSN. So I see that we have SSN for Spain, and then you have an SSN number for the US. So what this means is, if I have a regular expression in place that looks for a specific pattern of PII parameter, and I use this rule to scan or to discover data, then it makes a lot more, then it makes sense. It tells me, hey, it looks like we have PIIs in files 1, in location 1, so you might have to take a look. So when I get a clear understanding of where my PIIs are, then I can plan and come up with a plan to secure data. Now, what do you think?
Absolutely. So, and now you mentioned social security number, and we looked in the start of the webinar the different kinds of personal information that comes under the CCPA. So can we aggregate all of these different rules and then have it as one, say, policy for CCPA?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you'll be able to create your own packages or your own regex and then have it as one bundle and use it for scanning. So I'm not diving into the details of the product because this is not a product session. So I just wanted to say, please, when you discover data, have a rule or a pattern in place, because that helps a lot to pinpoint where your PIIs are. So that's data discovery and storage analysis. I know that I've not dived deep into the feature, but I just wanted to give a heads up on how you should be performing a data discovery. Oh, looks like a use case.
Right. So the reason I put this slide right here after the data discovery was to also tie it back to some of the rights of the consumers that we looked at. Right. So if you have a consumer who wants, to exercise their right to be forgotten, that is to delete their information from the organization.
So as an administrator, you should first know where the information is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So here, the reason I've given this flow diagram is to reiterate two important ideas. One is that the importance of IT being able to work with the rest of the business functions in order to be able to process this request quickly. And the second is to leverage the technology of data discovery to identify where this consumer's data is present in the network. Right? So for example, the consumer can come and give this request through any channel. It could be a phone call to a toll-free number. It could be an email or a written communication asking that their information be deleted. And irrespective of the channel of communication, there has to be a mechanism for first responding to the consumer telling that this request has been is being handled.
You mean this part?
Right, okay. Exactly. You give that information that, yeah, we are on this.
Okay.
And then the IT team comes in and is able to check and see where this person's data is stored.
And this is where my topic comes into picture, having a regex in place in order to see where this consumer's PII is.
Right.
Or where are the places, where are the possible places, all right?
Right. And then you go ahead, once you identify, you can delete it and then respond to the consumer with the report that this was all the data that you had and it's been deleted.
All right. Now that brings me to the second point, having some sort of access controls on the data that you store in the organization. Now, when I say access control, it means two things. One is understanding the existing chaos, so understanding the existing structure of, right, of your data. And number two is when you feel that something is inappropriate or someone has inappropriate access to data, which we have seen in the recent past. Again, I'm not picking names. So you've seen banks getting attacked. You've seen large organizations getting attacked, and internal employees sometimes reveal millions and millions of user information. So there has to be some sort of control over who has access to that data, right? First understand and then manage. So understanding and managing again takes me to this tool here. So you basically try to understand, after you have discovered data, you're trying to understand, all right, now who has what level of access to my information. So if you're just looking at, if you're talking about NTFS or if you're talking about share permissions, so where do I go to understand who has what level of access? All right, so there you go. So if you're talking about NTFS, there has to be a dedicated category that tells you, hey, these are your top folders, then these are the users who have access to folders. Now, one thing is you also should be able to understand that this is the access level, not just on the parent folder, but also on the subfolders, because there are cases where a folder has, let's say, 20 subfolders or 10 subfolders. So, and we all know that there is a concept called inheritance when it comes to folder structure. So you'll be able to set the inheritance to true or false. So we'll have to understand the permission in its entirety in order to know whether the permission is appropriate or the access is inappropriate. Now, the best way to handle this, I would say, is practice just-in-time access. Someone needs access to, let's say, a confidential, not confidential, let's say a business application, and that you have tied to a security group in Active Directory, or if you're using Azure, to Azure. So it's very important that you add user to that security principle so that they gain access to that application. And after they're done accessing the application, the access should be revoked. So the point that I'm trying to drive here is, after you understand that information is being accessed by certain people that are not supposed to be accessing the information, the next step that you'll have to do is have some sort of automation in place that will take care of granting users access to a resource. And after they are done accessing the resource, you'll have to ensure that the access is revoked. And I would prefer an automatic way of doing this rather than actually manually seeing whether the user has finished accessing the resource or having a word with the user. Just go ahead and automate the process. Grant and revoke. Think of automation. Automation goes a long way in streamlining the process or establishing some sort of access control in the entire infrastructure.
And you don't want to go giving, handing out privileges and accesses like it's free candy. So that's why it's important to have this ability to grant just in time and revoke.
With $750 per user, that's the last thing I want to do, right? Now, change auditing. This is a very crucial aspect which most of the administrators, I believe, would agree with me when I say this. Now, so far, we've discussed about how do you discover data and how do you establish some sort of access control and all that. But a very important piece to understand whether your information is in the right or the wrong hands is have change auditing practice in place. Let me give you a very classic example here. Now, every organization has Active Directory. And let me just pick one group out of that. The administrators, right? Now, the administrators have access to almost every resource inside the infrastructure. That involves files and folder structures too. And those files and folder structures can have PIIs. Who knows, right? Now, it's very important that we audit your top level security principles just because they have access to everything. And there are two aspects to it. Let me actually give you a very classic example here. Now, this is my Active Directory infrastructure. And I have this group called Application Admin IT Day, right? Now, any user that I add to this security group gains access to 20 different applications. Now, few of those applications have PII stored directly. Now, how do I secure access to PII? How do I ensure that my PII is not being accessed by certain inappropriate audiences? I'll have to audit this group, as simple as that. And auditing this group is from two perspectives. If I open up this group, I have members and I have member of. auditing members is not the big deal. Auditing member of, yes, I would say is the big deal. Let me give you an example here. So if you have the HR and you add the HR to the HR group so that they get access to applications, they get access to resources. By mistake, if you link the HR group to domain admins, now you have an additional administrator through group nesting, right? Now, similarly, if you add a regular user by mistake to a group named X, and that group X is linked to application admin, now the regular user indirectly has access to all the applications that I have tied to this security group. Does that make sense, Sid?
Absolutely.
All right. So what I do here is I establish an auditing principle for all my security principles, or let's say the most important security principles. Let me show this to you in real time here. So if I add a user to this group, okay, I want to add, let's say Brandon to this group. Let me search for Brandon. Do I have a user? Okay, so we have Brandon Curry, and I add this user to this group. Now, if I hit apply, Brandon gets access to 10 or 20 different applications that are tied to the security group. Now, if you as an administrator do not get a notification on this action, that could mean trouble, right? So that's where a tool comes into picture. So you notice this. So it looks like Brandon Curry was added to the security group application admin by Vivin. Vivin could be an administrator, right? So it's very important that we track.
Because this is not supposed to happen. You don't want Brandon in domain admins.
Not at all. That's not supposed to happen at all. I'm sorry. So when you have such inappropriate users being added either directly or indirectly, it's just the responsibility of every administrator to have an audit trail. Now, this again takes me back to the process that you explained. If you have a process in place to secure data, then you're better off if you don't have, when compared to not having a process at all. So this is part of it. Now, the most favorite part of my session or my process would be FIM, File Integrity Monitoring. Now, think about any action that your users do with files, folders. You should be knowing that in real time, right? I say that with a pause. You should be knowing that in real time. You'll have to have reports, you'll have to have alerts on such crucial things. So you should be able to analyze storage, that's one thing, but you should also be able to do something about FIM as well, right? Now, for instance, certain regulations like PCI DSS makes it a mandate that you have FIM if you store or credit card information, or if you process credit card information of user account. So that's when FIM really comes into a picture here. So now let me just quickly show you the FIM capability that I want you to establish. Of course, if you have another tool, please make use of it. But FIM is a very integral part of data security, especially with Windows file servers and clusters.
Because we're looking at the change auditing part for things like the groups and the group memberships. And then when you're looking at the data level, you need to be tracking changes happening at the data level as well. The first step is the layer is at the group level, where you're looking at the accesses and the changes to permissions that are occurring. But then you have to look at the changes that are happening at the data level as well.
Just take a look at this. Just take a look at this very simple report. Now, we are talking about hundreds and thousands of modifications here. And you should also have the ability to drill down to the exact event that you're looking at. Or if you know that, yes, this location has PII stored, that's taken care of in the first part. Now, you should be able to know the details or the whereabouts of that specific incident. If someone has accessed it, someone has copied those files, or someone has actually modified information. That's exactly what I mean by having a real-time FIM in place.
And you can see in this case, you just at this first glance, you see one person accessed by Harry, and you see a bunch of things that this person has carried out. And and this is a sign that maybe there's some exposure of sensitive data. This could be customer data. This could be CCPA, PII that Harry has accessed, deleted in this case, right? So these are things that could be considered a violation of the information security, violation of some of the rights of the consumers. And I guess this is why it's important to have this audit trail.
Harry's activities are suspicious. Okay, we'll have to track down Harry then. So it's not just file servers. I mean, there are other places in your network that have PII stored. So what are the other areas that an IT administrator should focus? Of course, we now talked about files enough. So what are the other areas do you think, Sid, that we'll have to focus on?
Well, of course, there's going to be databases, your SQL or Oracle databases. You're going to have cloud platforms. You might have data on something like OneDrive.
Okay.
Right. So today you have a lot of people storing or, sometimes backing up data on the cloud as well. So what you're really looking at is being able to monitor events and activities and all of the principles that we saw thus far across the entire network so that you can flag anything suspicious then and there, right? So you're just extending the scope. We saw a lot in terms of the file servers that are storing sensitive data, but really a SIM solution is something that is a very integral part of any data security program, because a SIM is going to monitor things happening across the network, correlate happenings on the file server with something happening on another endpoint, correlate that with something happening on the firewall, and alert the security team about an incident before it results in a data breach.
All right.
So we don't want to go to that point. We've learned so far that a data breach is going to cause fines. Why go until the point where the exposure of data has happened?
So you're saying that you'll have to be proactive than being reactive.
Right. At the early stage, when a security incident is developing, a SIM solution can give you these alerts so that you can go mitigate the incident.
Now, and I noticed the last point in your slide, which says augment SIEM with machine learning. Now, what do you think would be the advantage of leveraging machine learning to SIM? Of course, I understand SIM actually processes loads and loads of information, of security incidents to be more specific.
Right.
Now, why do you have to have some sort of machine learning built into your SIM solution, especially in the context of protecting data?
Well, I think today when we're talking about data exfiltration and insider threats, we just have such a difficult environment out there that attackers are always one step ahead. And if you want to track things in real time, if you want to look at anomalies in real time, you need this layer of machine learning. So for example, I have a report that says unusual volume of file activity or unusual file activity time, which means what if someone was accessing a file at an unusual hour, or what if someone was performing multiple modifications within a short period of time?
For that matter, can I say something like, if a user who's not supposed to be copying, or who's used to copying just, let's say, 10 files in a day, all of a sudden copies 100 files in a day,
right?
That's something that no human could actually write a rule and track. Of course you can, but there are chances of false positives too.
Right. So, and we saw that example where Harry was making a lot of deletions. Maybe Harry does only 2 or 3 file operations in a day, but at that point has done like 100. A UEBA comes into the picture and it can go one step ahead of traditional SIM solutions and give alerts and detect these anomalies that a traditional SIM solution might have missed, right? So the reason I had that point was just to say that today you have a lot of good advanced technologies that are out there that can augment some of these traditional mechanisms that we have in place. And I think it's sort of the need of the hour, because data exfiltration and insider attacks have become quite difficult to deal with. Right? So the insiders are more smarter than before. So it's also time, I think, for security systems to
evolve and then reach to that level.
Absolutely.
All right.
So this brings us to the end of our tech talk in terms of the presentation. I do want to say that we didn't want to talk too much about the product. We didn't want to talk too much about Manage Engine solution because we wanted to just keep this as an introduction to the CCPA and data security. But we do have a seminar coming up in the US, and this is happening in 3 cities in the month of November. So it's about a month and a half before the CCPA comes into effect. And we have a registration page that I'm going to send on the live chat. So this is a registration page that you can register for any of these. The same event is happening in 3 different cities in SF, in LA, and in Denver. So you can get a better idea of Manage Engine solutions. We're going to have 2 of our presenters flying in one from India and one is an MVP certified by Microsoft. And they're going to talk about cybersecurity and hybrid identity management. And I think that is going to be very crucial to some of the concepts that we've discussed in today's Tech Talk, right? Especially when you're looking at the CCPA, the identity management part ties back to the access controls, and cybersecurity ties back to the monitoring techniques that we touched upon.
And just adding to whatever you said, most of our seminars or webinars or whatever it is are not only around the products that we use. So there'll be a lot of best practices. So as is mentioned earlier, if you're using another tool, we'd be more than happy if you could just take away the action items and then put them to use in your organization too. I mean, maybe it could be another tool. That's totally fine. But as long as we get some benefit out of it, that's totally fine. Yeah,
absolutely. And that was the whole point of today's session. So thank you so much for joining us today. I know the CCPA is there's still time to go for it, but it's always good to get a head start. And I think having a conversation with customers is always a great learning opportunity. Right, so I hope this was a good exposure and experience for all of you attending today. These are our email IDs, Vivin's and mine, Siddharth. Do reach out to us if you need anything, you want to explore Manage Engine solutions, or you want to share some of your experiences and your prep steps for the CCPA.
Most important of all, please let us know what you'd like us to cover in CCPA. So if you want us to cover another aspect of CCPA altogether or show you more of the applications that we have, please do write to us.
Right. So we also have quite a few questions coming in. So just stick around for maybe another 2 to 3 minutes. Vivin and I are going to answer them immediately on the live chat.
Right.
Other than that, do take a moment when you close the webinar to fill up the feedback. Let us know what you liked about the session. Let us know what suggestions you have for future tech talks about the CCPA and about really anything else in the realm of IT security.
Okay.
Right. So thank you so much for joining us today. Stick around for 2-3 minutes in case your questions haven't been answered. But otherwise, hope to see you all at a future tech talk or a webinar, and hopefully at some of our seminars in the US in November. Right. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.